Thanks, Rusha, for your presentation, and thanks to everyone. What we discussed so far, it was very informative for us. So I'm going to talk about the summary. So we have been working on this from the past few months, and now this is for us to identify some of the possible or potential ways that we can really develop a tool that can answer all of our questions. So all the studies that we have discussed so far, we have grouped also into different phases of the hazard tsunami. I want to emphasize here why the phases of this hazard is important, because again, we are dealing with people. And when you think of evacuation, we are dealing with the people, and they have diverse behavior. And again, if you look into the studies, when we talk about evacuation, we are looking into the response phase. But then the response, your response depends on how much preparation you have taken ahead of time. And mitigation meaning that long term, on the long term, what are the things you can do? So we have identified the studies we have reviewed, we have grouped them into these different phases. Our recommendation is that the solutions, if we want to provide credible solution to this evacuation problem, I know we'll be focusing on the response and early recovery phase, but then it has to, the way people, the way the communities react depend on their preparation, and also the way the agencies, they come up with long-term mitigation plan. So how you learn from previous disasters, and then what is the long term. So there are a few things you can do in the short term, there are a few things you can do in the long term. So we group those studies into mitigation. So these are the different phases. Again, we want to highlight that although we are talking about the evacuation, which is the response, but they are interconnected with each other, which we have learned in the hurricane evacuation literature domain. So we have invested a lot of time in hurricane evacuation modeling, and this is our eventual realization that if you don't consider all the phases of a disaster, the solution that you envision to develop do not provide credible output. Now I'll move on to my recommendations. First, what we have learned from the current best practices. So it's very important for us to identify the vulnerable locations because the way, if you want to study how the community will behave, it depends on how much risk they perceive. I'm really impressed that on the evacuation warning, the tsunami warning side, people in Chile, they have made a lot of progress, but we have to make a connection. Once you can predict the vulnerability, for example, how much flooding it will occur, now it is the time to understand. Just give me 1 second. So yeah, sorry for the, I apologize for that. So now vulnerable location identification is very important because your models will be based on the risk each community perceive. Now, also we have seen in the literature, the focus has been on the risk assessment and also in the warning system. So we are in the right direction. We have to emphasize more on the evacuation on the response side, but as we do it, we have to connect it with the warning information and risk assessment. So we have to make connections. And also evacuation shelter allocation. A lot of, again, we are dealing with evacuation. It's a mobility problem. It's a transportation. Basically, the theories are coming from transportation, how people move from one place to another, and it has to deal with the behavior of the people, the evacuees that we are talking about. And for tsunami, as we discussed, vertical evacuation is more prominent than horizontal evacuation. But again, we see a lot of horizontal evacuation. How we balance those things, and should we promote horizontal evacuation as compared to vertical evacuation? All these things depends on the shelters you have available. So currently, what are the shelters you have, and in the future, what are the potential shelter that you want to designate? So this is also important. We'll move on to the next few recommendations. Structural feasibility. So it's not only identifying the the shelter points, but also if they're structurally feasible or not. We have to assess that. And as you have seen in the study of the Australia study, they have developed a model to kind of rank their physical infrastructure system into different category, high risk, low risk, or something like that. Because again, your evacuation, your response will depend on this location that people choose. And also evacuation behavior analysis is very important because we are going to discuss about figure. Evacuation behavior is the most important thing that we need to study, because if we do not study what people prefer, only simulation or numerical models or analytical models may not, there will be a mismatch if we cannot align these two aspects, what people prefer and what the agencies want people to do. So that's why we need to do a comprehensive behavioral studies, especially for evacuation is very important because people make different decisions. And that's why this evacuation modeling is different from traditional transportation problems we solve because of these dynamics in people's risk perception and the risk itself and the timing of the risk. So we have to thoroughly study the behavior of people. We are going to talk in details what are the different dimensions. But then finally, if you can study the behavior as detailed as possible, you incorporate these behavioral rules into your simulation. And then the tool you develop, it will produce a credible solution. Say how much time it will take you to clear the area and something like that. The countermeasures, identifying the critical hotspots, and so, all those things. So similarly, before we move on to simulation, we have to study the behavior, what people prefer and what they have preferred in the past. So just to summarize what I have discussed, again, this is from our review. We have seen in the evacuation warning, there has been a lot of studies. We have made a lot of progress, but then we need to study the sequential decisions of evacuees. The people who evacuate, I mean, in the best possible case, we want all of the people to evacuate. For example, in case of hurricanes, so we have seen even under the mandatory evacuation order, only 1/4 of the people they evacuate, but almost 3/4 of the people that do not evacuate. So the decision itself depends on a lot of socio-demographic factors. Predicting the evacuation demand is the most important step to analyze the rest of the decision making. We have to first of all identify how much demand is being generated, how many people are evacuating. Then the people who evacuate, they have sequential decisions to make. For example, the mobilization time. What does it mean? That the people who decided to evacuate, how much time they need to prepare. I know tsunami is a short notice evacuation scenario, but still they need to spend some time to prepare before they actually depart. So now the departure time is also important. Exactly what time they are coming out of their households. So these decisions, all these decisions are primarily governed by household factors and the location factors. We're going to talk about it, but those factors, they really govern how people are going to choose many of the different options they have. The people who depart at some point, also they have to choose a destination. Where are they going? Are they going to a friend's house? Are they going to find a tall building? Are they going out of the state? So the destination, the possible destination choice is also important, because otherwise you don't know how much time it will take people to safely, all of the people to safely clear the area. So destination choice is also important. And mode choice, basically once you identify, no, I'm going to go to this tall building, which is probably a few miles away from my home. Now, do I prefer to walk or do I prefer to drive? Do I need special accommodation? These are especially important for special accommodation group, elderly population. They need additional care as they evacuate. So these are very important factor for population groups. So we need to really consider that. And for a given type of mode, now you have to think of the route. As Rusha was mentioning, that if you prefer to walk, there might be obstacles on your way. So you also need to identify the possible routes. All this is possible if we have these behavioral rules that we can establish, and then we can come up with strategic measures. Do you want to come up with an evacuation route? Do you want to designate some of the routes? only it is possible if you have the prior data, you know the preferences of people, you can understand their likely behavior, and then you can recommend. So again, these are the decision making that we really need to study in details. Now I'll move on to the product that we should envision, what we are talking about here. So this is an evacuation tool that we have developed. I'll start playing the video. There's a button for those of you who are controlling the session. There's a play button. If you play this, the video will run. This is what we have developed over the course of 5-6 years at Purdue University. This is primarily on evacuation. So we have talked about agent-based modeling. What does it do? Why is it so comprehensive, and why is it so popular these days? Because you can deal with the demand-side models and supply-side models. If you want to study evacuation, you need to understand the behavior, as I mentioned. So you want to deal with the demand side. What is happening, how many people coming out, where they're going, how they're going. So you have to, and these are all based on household characteristics. Because different people, they have different needs. And to some extent, it depends on the severity of the hazard. How strong is the upcoming hazard? Then you develop the behavior model. These are like statistical models. You come up with some statistical models that can predict the demands and other stuff. But there's once you have these models, you want to kind of assess the impact in the system as people are moving from one place to another. So you need to deal with the supply side. Once you know the evacuation demand, where they are going, these are the agent rules that you want to deploy. But where you deploy it, you have the traffic network or the community that we talk about. So you have to use the shapefiles. So you take the most updated shapefiles, and you can integrate different layers of shapefiles. For example, it's not only the roads and the path, but probably you need to identify or create a shapefile for the obstacles, right? One study we found that as you are walking, there might be a parked vehicle that will kind of restrain you to move further. So GIS is also very comprehensive. All we are trying to say here is that you integrate GIS and behavior models in the same platform, so that you can assess the impact, what happens in this system. So you can estimate the average travel time, how much time it will take you to clear the area. So you can come up with different metrics, how the system is performing. And this is only possible if we study the behavior of the evacuees and what we want. So from the system perspective, because people have their own preferences, no matter how much route guidance you provide, they have their own preferences because of their personal constraint. So we have to closely align behavior and supply side models integrated into the same platform to produce credible results. That is the key to success in evacuation research. So in the supply side model, as I mentioned, in the demand side model, you can think of the behaviors that we discussed. But in the supply side model, then you can, once you know the agents, how many agents are being populated from an area, you can replicate their behavior, how far, if they are driving, how far, how much distance they maintain from one another. We call it car following model. So you now take some of the existing traffic flow models integrated into this evacuation simulator to understand the evacuation performance. But in this case of tsunami, we see a lot of vertical evacuation and pedestrian evacuation. So there are also some studies on how quickly people can walk depending on their age or something. So we need to capture those variations also in these supply side models. And then, so the objective is to replicate the whole tsunami scenario from warning to response integrated in the same platform, so that our analysis is more credible. That should be our objective. So now I'll talk briefly about some more things to wrap up what we discussed. So in transportation, again, evacuation is a spatial transportation problem, mobility problem. In traditional transportation problem, we deal with from where to where people are going, how they are going, mode choice and route choice. As you can see in this figure, we call it 4 steps travel demand forecasting. But now for evacuation, you do those things once you know the preferences of people. Without knowing the travel demand or the evacuation demand, we cannot predict the clearance time, how much time, the network clearance times, the output that we want in the supply side. So we have to study in depth the behavior we can do studies in two different ways, reveal preference and stated preference. One thing is that because of the scenario, people might show different behavior. So we should do before and after study, what they have preferred in the past. We need to talk to the people in the communities or that were affected in the past, and what they will do in the future. Because as we are trying to build our capacity here, we need to understand, again, to better capture the preferences of people. What they have preferred in the past might not be the same in the future. So we need to conduct a revealed preference survey and stated preference survey to understand those decision-making metrics and the models. Each of them are coming up with more models. So now when we say evacuation modeling, it consists of multiple models. When we are doing the survey, it's very important that we capture the sample representativeness. Because again, the decision depends on the age, gender, income, the background I have. My decision is a function of all those socio-demographic factors. So there are a lot of straightforward modeling framework available in the literature. We can run regression, multinomial logging, depending on the data. For example, ordered, logit, and probit. If you are dealing with preferences of people, ordered data. So once you have the data, you can predict that. That's straightforward, but we have to ensure sample representativeness. In many of our evacuation studies, we have found that if we don't have representative data, if we cannot capture the variation of the need of the people in the population, the model you develop might not be applicable. So we have to be very careful about the sample representativeness. I'll move on to my last slide, where I'm going to talk about more that not only socio-demographic factors, but the demand side econometric models or the behavior models I just discussed, they also depend on the location, the community itself, how far it is from a water body, what is the risk, what is the level of risk, what is the type of land use, residential versus commercial, right? Because those things are depending, the timing of evacuation also depends on the land use pattern. So severity, distance from water, and do they belong to any designated evacuation zones? So location specific variables we should incorporate. And also my evacuation decision is also depend on the evacuation specific factor, past experience, type of evacuation warning. So again, here the agencies play a role. If you are providing a mandatory evacuation order, your assumption is that more people will evacuate. But you may not want to evacuate all of the people together. We call a terminology, there is a terminology called staged evacuation. You want people to evacuate in a staged manner. So probably in the beginning, you want to provide some voluntary evacuation order and that are at less risk. And then you provide mandatory order for the risks that are highly vulnerable, so that you can better control the evacuation process. So depending on the type of the warning, the evacuation behavior will be different. Of course, you have household specific factors, the number of people you're evacuating with, do you have pets to carry? So all those variables actually influence the way I behave at that particular panic moment. So now this is what we have in the behavior side, but in the supply side, as I mentioned, we need to implement pedestrian flow models, traffic flow models, so that the agents from the evacuation demand, they can follow the right rules as people move from one place to another. For that, GIS is a useful tool. You have traffic shapefile, road shapefile. You can integrate as I have shown in my video. And then there are some, for the case of Chile, as people walk a lot, again, obstacle shapefiles. If there's no existing shapefiles, you want to develop new shapefiles that can really make our tool more exciting and more prominent. So again, my last 3 points are predicting evacuation demand, also depend on warning information source. I'm happy that Chris mentioned that they have made a lot of progress on warning, tsunami warning, and also meeting points. So those things that we have to take away, it's not like the studies that we have already done, we just isolate them. No, we have to take values from those models to integrate into our model. One thing is basically, I think Rusha was mentioning about social media data. The variables the variables you see in this list that govern my decision making, there's also another sources, I mean, another factor, which is what type of information I get from agencies and what is the quality. Do I receive warning information from social media? Do I receive warning information from a television or a local radio channel, or there is a siren warning system you have implemented? Based on how you implement the warning information sources, that also influence to some extent how many people evacuate and how they evacuate. So we also need to consider as much as possible these warning information sources. Finally, agent-based modeling is the most prominent or most credible platform you can think of. As you have seen, it's very comprehensive, but there are some challenges. At some point, if you increase number of agents that you want to deal with, the computational challenges increase. And also the network you want to deal with. Is it a small network or is it a big network? Depending on the size of the network, the computational challenges increase significantly. So at that point, you have to kind of find out people from computational background to deal with those challenges and collaborate with them. But this is overall recommendations we have for the next steps. Now we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Arif and Ahmed. Now we are beginning with the Q&A session. We still have 20 minutes to go. Have you got any comments to facilitate translation? I would suggest that right now we prioritize the Spanish-speaking group from Chile so that we can listen to any questions or comments they might have to be translated to Ahmed and Arif. We could like kind of summarize the questions and pass them on to Arif so that Arif can take note of them, and afterwards you can respond. And afterwards we might kind of summarize to see how the next steps would be looking like and how could we establish that possible cooperation. So let's open up to questions and comments. Thank you very much for your presentations. It has been quite interesting. As I was saying at the beginning, I believe these are the next steps to somehow fine-tune the decisions that we are taking and that we are designing. The work carried out has been very interesting. The question would be, what would you expect from us? What's the idea of the project? With the modeling you have, what would you require from us? And also as a suggestion, two things. It's extremely important in this kind of work in Chile to incorporate the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning to the standard of points of encounter evacuation routes, which have been developed jointly with them, with that ministry. So, why? Because that would be the most direct route. Other things that we have designed in Chile is which is the safest route, not only the shortest or the most direct route, but also the safest route for evacuation. That is another input to include into the modeling. And also how to integrate other research held on this. There is a professor from Universidad Católica, they're looking at the whole highway network, their critical nodes to know if an area is critical for the evacuation process. We're taking people to assembly points. Okay, those would be the aspects to add. Very interesting, Cristóbal. I think that these are some of the elements that definitely the idea is to have more of these recommendations, as had been done in your presentation before from the Ministry of Public Works that was working on this. Now that you are also mentioning the Ministry of Housing for standards and designs, this is related to the fact that you are foreseeing not only strictly evacuation aspects, but also aspects related to urban infrastructure and all the aspects that are permanently evolving in all our countries. Currently, we have tremendous investment on this, and that's why Arif was mentioning about the importance of contemplating the different components at the same time, not only response, but including mitigation, early recovery, development, all the elements comprehensively. I think that is very interesting. And the other thing is the need for this as a joint work, and what part of what we are foreseeing here is precisely that point of encounter with the University of Chile, which already has experience in the management and development, as Cecilia said, that we share 100%. Our objective is capacity building. More than any other thing, this program seeks precisely that that you just mentioned, how to generate new resources to add and not to compete. I think that this is what we're doing here, is seeking that. When we had the first conversations with Jorge, I see that Jorge Amaya is here with us. When we spoke about using the modeling center, when we spoke about Jaime's topic in relation to Mauricio's work, what is being done in other areas, how can we incorporate all these elements in such a way that we are an articulating factor, and that this is more an opportunity to add and not at all to compete. The other thing that Arif did not talk about, but I would like to say now, is that this is a project that we see at 3 years, 6 months have gone by for those 3 years, but it means that this is not anything that's short term or just a paper and that's it. The idea is to continue working in some aspects, to choose in a small scale a location or two, joint efforts there, look at this integrally as is being mentioned, Cristóbal. I fully agree. Take a look at the city, the community, and based on that, then we can begin taking those first steps that allow developing these dynamics for that first year, that afterwards in the second and third year can be implemented, and that allow expanding by allowing the participation of other universities and other stakeholders in a decentralized manner. When we were talking to Jorge and Carmen Paz, this has been part of what we have been doing with this joint cooperation with the University of Chile. It would be along those same lines. But we would enter into that specificity that Cecilia was mentioning, that proliferation of models that we just heard about, where definitely there is much to take out from, not duplicate, but take advantage of the talent that we have and give time to other groups that have not been benefited as part of that elite that's currently working in modeling. It's good so that other disciplines can enter also to be part of this. Other fields may enormously contribute to generate that idea of working in a more open manner and in a more cross-cutting manner with the different stakeholders and fields involved. Any other comment so that I can pass the floor to Arif? Could I say something? Yes, Maria Victoria. Thank you. Good morning to all. We are very grateful for this invitation. I want to thank you all for the presentation. It was extremely interesting to see all the different models in existence. As Juan Pablo was saying, the idea is not to duplicate efforts, because this way we can know what there is already. I agree with many of the ideas presented. They are very interesting. My name is Maria Victoria Soto from the University of Chile. Together with Carmen Paz and Jaime Campos, we belong to the network of universities in Chile where we have been working on this. There is something that we're quite interested in, which is related to the local scale that at some time we have dealt with also. Because right now we were talking about the people who need to be evacuated. These people have characteristics, social characteristics, age, gender, disabilities. The areas where they live have specific characteristics as well. Cristobal or Cecilia, for example, mentioned that the 30 meters, which is what is recommended, that is as a part of land planning instrument, which is recommended, but perhaps it's not necessary in each coastal area, but we do not know necessarily about that. It would mean that we also have a need to adjust evacuation resources at the local level. Juan Pablo and colleagues, Chile, we have these specific characteristic that we have the cadastre of people to spatial units of 100 per 100 meters. So we know in each household how many people, men, women, elderly population, children, disabled population, we know in each household who comprises the population and what are the vulnerabilities of this population. Why? Because in Chile we have not more than 15 to 20 minutes to evacuate before the tsunami wave hits us. That is a fundamental aspect that we need to take into account. Then we also need to consider the specificities locally in the coastal areas. Chile, as one of the speakers said, we have this irregular coast. This means, and we verified that in the events in 2010 and 2014, that a tsunami has a different manifestation in the southern part, in the central part, and in the northern part of one same bay. So, for example, in the Bay of Coquimbo, there in the northern part, the wave had 4.5 meters, but 5 kilometers to the north, the wave had just 1 meter in one single bay, the same bay. So these different local manifestations that are related to bathymetry, to tsunami, to the coastal line, and now to the local population, these are analyses that we have to make and which generate an economy in the big sense of the word of resources, lives, evacuation measures, evacuation routes, vertical evacuation, etc. That's a very important challenge. We have the tools for that because we have the databases. Now we need to combine that with the other models, with everything that you have. And Carmen Paz would like to add something. Thank you very much, and I apologize for taking so long. Carmen Paz, is that a complement of this, or is that something separate? compliment? No, no, Jorge can do it. I'll compliment later. It's okay. Jorge, go ahead. Thank you very much for your presentation. I found it so interesting, as has been the whole meeting, but I would like to go to the point. Data. There was a series of points presented in relation to social behavior, which is very important. As you can see, for example, now the COVID case, which influences everything else. What my concern here is the type of data used for that, the reliability of that data, the quality of that data. What would I do in case of the preferences of people? What would I do in case of is one thing I say, and what I really do is something else. And this has two different levels, the individual level, which is psychological, and an anthropological global level. Let's take a look at what has happened in New York recently with COVID, or Portugal, where you overvalue personal freedom. People are not obeying what authorities require in some places. I'm concerned about that because we're working right now with the pandemia, and that would be how to incorporate this modeling and adapt it to the physical model. We have an expansion model here that Mauricio and the people from FIU mentioned, the expansion and the physical model of tsunami, the pandemia also, and a behavioral model that have to be integrated. This is a general idea. That's my concern. It's important to really analyze this, the type of data, how they are collected via survey or however this is done. This is very interesting and cross-functional. That's something I was just wanted to mention for further discussion later on. Carmen Paz, hello to all. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much, Juan Pablo, for FIU inviting us to participate and for choosing Chile as one of the countries that are going to be incorporated in this project. This is really wonderful to have this possibility of working all together in this encounter. I'm seeing friendly faces here. People I've known for long. But my comment in relation to what Jorge just said, the challenge that we're going to have is integration to generate a more complex model that considers these variables of the geophysical processes and the socio-territorial model. And within this socio-territorial model, the social behavior that I think we should find a way of having information on the behavior of previous evacuations. You know that here we have had serious problems. I'm thinking of the last earthquake in La Serena, what the evacuation was like. We were having some studies there, surveys. There we have really dramatic processes there, and we just miss the models. We see people running around like crazy. We have heart attacks and things like that happen. And I think that there is something that we need to work with socially, as also group behavior and individual behavior. And I also relate this to what was pointed out at the beginning by Cristobal on how to work on social communication. This communication has two main pathways. One is the technical information, how is it transmitted, and the other one is if there is no trust on the media, the communication will not be effective. So how to generate reliable communication? These two elements validate communication to be incorporated into the population. For example, perception studies that we have held in tsunami areas, For example, in Iquique, there is denial of risk, and there are sectors within the area, the tsunami area, that have greater risk than others. We have to go, they have denial of risk, I'm sorry, more in some areas than in others. So those are elements that are good to work on. I really appreciate this group. The geophysics department, the universities here, that's very important, and the modeling center. I think that this is a very powerful team we have here. And of course, we could expand much more to work jointly. Thank you very much for this possibility. Thank you, Cecilia. Would you like to say something? No. I just want to emphasize the suggestions made here by my professors. And I've also had to interact in other occasions with other projects that are ongoing, and I have also been able to observe that there is so much information available, but in fact we're lacking a compilation. We need to organize all this information. And on the other hand, well, I wanted to thank you for taking us into account. We are very interested in participating and helping in whatever we can. And personally, I just love this topic, so I'm totally open to provide all the support I can. Okay, let's do this since we are already over time. I'm going to yield the floor to Arif so that he can quickly answer to a few of the elements presented here. But this is not over here. I want you to know that. Yes, Juan, give me just a minute. This will be an introduction to the discussion. We take these elements. We are going to analyze this interaction we have had, these components that we have had. We're going to share with you the revision of the literature. This means that there is a base document there. This means that if there is something that's missing, we can complement that, and we can build upon something that allows, as Cecilia says, to join these our forces, our efforts, specifically related to evacuation, so that we can build upon that. So it's not to go back constantly, but we will complete a vision with this document, and we own this so that we can continue with the next steps. I'm going to now pass on to Juan before Ari. Juan. Yes, I apologize. I had raised my hand before, but well, it's just a short thing I want to add. I agree with everything that has been presented here, and I want to say that the impact of this project and the results should specifically have something, a real outcome locally. So all the modeling and all the things that we can be advancing here, I propose to link this to things that we really want to have an impact on. If there's a modeling of evacuation of the population, obviously the impact would be in the change and improvement of evacuation plans, for example. But if we are modeling or thinking on populational behavior and we would link that to effective strategy to want to make a real change, basically this would be a diagnosis, but we have to be real. All the efforts have to be linked, and we are adding the stakeholders that have to be the right ones to make these changes. Because if we do not integrate this, this would be great work, but with no real impact. And that's what we would like, is to have all these efforts become into pilot experiences that can be replicated nationally. That was my comment. And here we take Cristobal's proposal. This is the moment to choose where we're going to be working, and that has to integrate the stakeholders. I'm sorry. we have been working for some time with the Ministry of Housing in the projects. So this would be a wonderful opportunity to integrate aspects that will have some kind of real impact in investment, improvement, actions, the Ministry of Works, ONEMI. This is essential one, and it takes us back to the beginning, how to choose that point where the different stakeholders can meet locally, nationally. That would be wonderful. Arif, I yield the floor to you.
Okay, so thank you so much for all these comments. I think those are really valid comments and very informative also. I'll quickly go one by one, as much as possible. First of all, I think integration is a challenge definitely for ABM because again, we're envisioning to do something more credible. Otherwise, we can just only use traditional transportation models and simulation tool, but they do not provide credible results. When you talk about evacuation plan, if we don't have something more comprehensive, the plans we develop will not be credible. Again, the operation on the response you experience based on those plans will not be something that you are going to be expecting. So there'll be a lot of mismatch. So we want to integrate as much as possible so that we see less mismatch of demand and supply. That is the ultimate goal. But reliability of the data, as I mentioned, again, most of the traditional methods of understanding behavior is survey. As I mentioned, we have to look into their past behavior and future behavior. Surveys are time consuming, expensive. We had to invest 50,000 US dollars for each of the studies we have done in the past hurricanes. So I know there is a resource constraint, but again, as Dr. Juan Sarmiento, he mentioned that we do not want to duplicate work. Since we have this big picture ahead of us, I think we can optimize our resources. We can put together the survey questionnaires in the same survey so that when we invest money in collecting data, it's optimized. So we can capture as much behavioral aspect as possible. I'm happy to know that you are working with Ministry of Housing, and exactly that's where we are trying to bring your attention. We need to closely work with the people in need. We want to identify their risk factors. We have to profile their risk, high risk, low risk, and based on that, you can come with policy recommendation. And having a tool like an agent-based modeling tool will allow us to create more credible evacuation plan and evacuation response strategies. I think, yeah, again, on the reliability survey data, if you have a representative sample, then your survey data is still quite good. But then these are not as big data as, like big data that we talk about these days, social media data. But now, data is always a challenge, but I think we are in the right direction. If we can conduct surveys that can be comprehensive, I think it will be at least, it will provide some reliability. And for the GIS data, for example, for the supply side data, one thing I forgot to mention during my presentation is that demand side modeling will take a lot of time because you have to do the survey, collect the data, develop those models, behavior models, then you integrate to the ABM. But alongside demand side models, we can work on the supply side model, creating credible GIS files of the vulnerable locations, identifying possible obstacles, hazardous buildings, infrastructure. We can improve on GIS because these days GIS is so improved. So we can create new shape files from the location context. We talked about, some of you mentioned about local context. Yes, local context is very important. The variables you deal with in your agent-based modeling depends on the context. Some of the cities are completely different from the other locations. So location context is very important. And again, I think, and there has been a lot of studies on tsunami warning. I think integration will always be a challenge, but we can find out the direction as we move from here. I think this is pretty much I have, Dr. Sarmiento, from my side. We can work together on the challenges from here onwards.
So as not to extend this too much and to know that in future occasions when we meet, we know that we can trust the time assigned. I do not want to take too much longer. We have taken note of all your recommendations and we will be using all your comments. and we keep close communication with most of you or all of you, but please know that we are going to have that desire to back ONEMI 100%. We want to back up the work of the authorities working on. He is an expert in hurricanes in the eastern coast of the United States. So he has decades of experience with one of the professors, Hugh Lagwin, who is one of the persons who developed this whole theory on behavior and evacuation behavior. And the great challenge for him has been to enter into this geodynamic zoo topic, where we have a different source. So that is a wealth of joining years of experience and now changing to a specific threat with a different behavior. And we have unique challenges. And as Carmen Paz was saying, that we chose Chile, it's simple. It is possible to work in Chile with the geographical characteristics that Chile has, with the cities where they're located, with a high seismic risk, with a probability of tsunami hazards. It's unique. It's totally unique. So that means that if we're capable of developing these dynamics at the different levels of exposure, it's going to be a lot easier afterwards for you to be the ones that accompany the processes that are made in Latin America, in those countries that are at risk. The idea is this capacity building system, but at the same time, it is about empowering these people who are coming in, so that afterwards these are people who are multiplying and sharing. As Cecilia said, they began in 2010, and afterwards they were the place to deliver them. This is the way, and much more now that we have the possibility of working together. I want to thank you. Thank you very much, Cristóbal, Cecilia, Mauricio, Jorge, Juan, Fausto, Carmen Paz, Maria Victoria. We always communicate, and to all the rest of the people who are participating in this. And we're going to have possibility of working with Jaime and of going back on some of these things. Soon we're going to be with you. And we're going to have more concrete and practical things on the table to begin to have the ball rolling. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.